Hello, everybody. Adam Parks here with another Receivables Info webinar. Today, we're here with one of the more popular topics that we've presented recently, which is Receivables AI and kind of the whole discussion around artificial intelligence and its applications, its legitimate applications to the receivables management industry. And so today, I wanted to bring on two different perspectives for the discussion. First, we have Cris with Latitude by Genesys, who's coming with the perspective of kind of the system of record, how this information is flowing in and out of your core systems and kind of managing that process and being able to house and operationalize some of that data. And then we've also got Nathan with SuccessKPI, who can talk to us about AI from a lot of different perspectives, right? I know you've spent some time in voice. I know we've presented on AI at a few conferences together. But gentlemen, thank you so much for coming on. As we kick it off today, Cris, could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got to the seat that you're in today?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Cris Bjelajac. I'm one of the co-business owners of the Latitude line of business at Genesys. I'm in my 20th year in the contact center side of things. And about 5 years ago, I was brought on to run the Latitude by Genesys line of business along with Ian Winder, my co-business owner. So happy to be here. Spent a long time in and out of collections and enjoying it quite a bit.
Excellent. Well, thank you for coming with us today. And Nathan, can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got to the seat that you're in today?
Yeah. So I am a old school, long-standing bill collector. I started in this industry as a collector back in 1995, collecting on bad checks. To really date myself, when people actually use checks to pay for things. I been in the industry in the operations side for close to 24 years. I made the transition over the technology side of the business about call it about 6, close to 7 years ago, and worked for a company called Interactions, where they built intelligent virtual assistants. And then most recently, now 2 years now with SuccessKPI. And so I've had the luxury of being able to see both the operational side of the business in terms of, dealing with client concerns, compliance, security, all those fun things, but also, the vendor side of the world, to be able to say, like, what are the challenges of a quickly evolving technology landscape within our industry, and the challenges of I know a lot of companies out there of vetting that technology, figuring how it fits into their world. So glad to join and excited to have the conversation.
Well, I think this will be a good one. We're picking up a little bit of static on your microphone out of nowhere, but I think it'll work through it. So the first things as we were talking about AI, because we were having a really good discussion as we were kind of waiting for all of this to kick off today. But as we were kind of sitting there, we were talking about the application of AI to our world and kind of some of the cost models that we think are going to be coming out. It's, I feel like we've got this freemium version of the ChatGPT type technologies now. And we were kind of opining a little bit on what those cost structures might look like when they look to actually create the cash flow from their multi-billion-dollar investments into artificial intelligence. But, from a high level and kind of to kick off our discussion today, we wanted to talk about the 3 different types of artificial intelligence and what that actually means. Because I feel like AI is one of those, or artificial intelligence is one of those terms that just gets thrown around a little too loosely. These days, I feel like, every process under the sun is now artificial intelligence. And I think we need to kind of put a framework around the language that we're going to use today. And so, Nathan, I know we were kind of talking about this a little bit. You want to run through these with us?
For sure. Is my voice still staticky, or are we good?
Yeah, I'm still getting a little bit of static. Are you hearing
a little bit, yeah.
Let me see.
Seems like it got a little better.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll keep running while he kind of works through that piece. But we were talking about kind of the three different layers, and you can almost look at these like the process in which artificial intelligence has started to come out into the receivables industry. And what we mean by that is, from a machine learning standpoint, the first application of AI that we saw across the receivables management space was a machine learning or a scoring type technology. So you saw a lot of organization taking mountains of transactional data, mountains of account data, mountains of production data, and running that through machine learning models in an attempt to better understand or better predict the future of other accounts. So accounts meeting similar criteria, what can we expect from those? And so I think a lot of us experience that type of technology from a scoring methodology, right? And that was kind of that first wave of application that we saw in the space. And then there was this next wave that started coming through, which was the natural language processing. And I feel like we're still just on the cusp of that becoming part of usable products within the receivables management industry, right? So now you're starting to see organizations that are leveraging communications technology, whether that be outbound or inbound phone management. You're seeing chat bots. You're seeing all different kinds of tools that are able to be used, from a communications standpoint. And I think that's kind of where we're at in the process. But then what comes after that, if we look at, our understanding of artificial intelligence, is kind of the robotics, the robotic process management in the physical world. And one thing when we talk about robotics, I want to make sure is very different, that there is a significant difference between robotic process automation and artificial intelligence. Like those are not the same thing. An RPA, or robotic process automation, is something that you can teach a system a specific process, but it can't interpret the world or the environment around it. It can just perform a specific task. And I'm sure when it comes to robotics, and I'm, one of my friends that actually originally I'd met in the space is now head of AI for Levantis, and seeing what they're doing from a robotic standpoint. And you look at the dogs and all kinds of other tools that you're starting to see across the internet and videos. And I think that's going to be a whole other world. But how do you think, or do you guys think we're ever going to see robotics actually applied to the receivables management space?
Let me first test his audio better.
Yes.
Yeah, you're good.
So it's interesting. So I apologize for the technical issue, but in terms of direct operations, I think there are going to be some applications in terms of the way that we can now ingest visual aspects through AI. So whether that be things like facial emotional recognition, whether that be the ability to ingest large amounts of data through text, right? So being able to understand conversations and then translate that into action. I think there's going to be pieces in there that do it, but like I've made this argument with a number of people of how similar in terms of trajectory our business is in terms comparative to, say, the warehousing business, meaning things like Amazon and other companies who ship and send stuff. So right, if you look at a warehouse today, it's a fairly bit of a ghost town of people, but a buzzing world of robotics, right? Now in our industry, it's not necessarily picking up a box and sending it somewhere, but there absolutely will be pieces of the same trajectory of like when you do things like simple things like sending or receiving information, while you're not necessarily doing it in a robotic, like a manual way, it still is replicating human intervention and human intelligence. So to some extent, yes, but I think it's going to be more cues than full process robotics, if that makes sense.
Well, I think the intelligence that's being created at this point is going to feed a lot of that. So I think what we've seen is, and kind of going to our slide talking about the evolution of the AI application to our space, right? It started in the scoring and it was simple. It was about ingesting massive amounts of information and driving some value from it. I think that the timelines for that shorten significantly as we talk about written communications, right? When we're talking about the chats and the like ARM communication advisor letter reviews, now we've got like robotic attorneys that are reviewing these things. Or is that at the point of artificial intelligence or not? Well, it is still being fed right now by live lawyers. And then I think you'll see, right, you'll see that product and others similar to it start to evolve. But I think the purpose went from, how do I best spend the time of my agents, right? Or my production floor? How do I best spend my time? How can I further improve the efficiencies of those people through communications? And then I think we're going to start, originally it was the written communications, and now you're seeing more voice type tools that are in the market. We see them at all the conferences. But now I think you're going to start seeing more of the actionable intelligence. And I feel like that's the end point that the industry is ultimately looking for, is a deeper understanding of that actionable intelligence. Because whether you're a debt buyer, a collection agency, a law firm, a creditor, like you have mountains of information, right? Like you've got whole teams of people in your organization dedicated to managing that technology infrastructure and that data. But what actionable intelligence are you able to derive from that to take and predict next steps? I was in a meeting recently where I started referring to reports as, telling me the history of what has happened, but my business intelligence is my future, right? Like predicting what will happen next. And it's important for me to know what I've done, but it's infinitely more important for me to be able to predict what's going to happen next. Right. And what's going to happen next in terms of, even what should be the next communication to that particular consumer based on these behavioral characteristics. And that's not something that we can look at as humans and generally manage at scale. But I feel like we're going to see more learning down that path.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think the challenge, right, that our industry has had, and it's not going away anytime soon compared to a lot of other industries, is just the regulatory and compliance challenges that we have, or guardrails that we have, that quite frankly a lot of other industries don't have to the same extent. So unfortunately that's kind of put us in a slow play comparative to say retail. But I'd 100% agree. And it's funny, you can even see the change in the way companies are being even marketed or built or named, and the way that, like you were talking about, the difference between finding and looking at something as opposed to doing something with it, right? And so that whole actionable intelligence layer, is I think one of the biggest keys of AI today is that we've started to finally evolve away from just finding things and observing them and putting them in a report and then leaving it up to someone else to do something with it, or human to do something with it. And now AI is at a point, and it's trustworthy enough where you can actually complete that action loop, right? I found things that are interesting, that actually based off of the models I know the next best action should be, and then let the tool do it. Let the machine do it. And that's I think it's an exciting thing. And those companies, I think, that saw that vision, say 2 years, 3 years ago, and there's a number of them in the industry, are really reaping the rewards today.
True. And I think those that were the first movers are definitely gaining market share and are going to have a more defensible position. We're getting the feedback in your mic again, Nathan. I don't know if you maybe try switching microphones, but Cris, from your perspective, right? Like you've been here through all of this, and since you've been in system of record, sales and management prior to artificial intelligence's application to the space. What has the evolution been like from your perspective?
I would say in the time that I've been involved, the evolution was slow, and then all of a sudden somebody's just, stuck their foot on the gas right now. And part of that had nothing to do with AI. It had to do with COVID and the amount of debt that's flowing from the creditors into the third party space and into the debt buying space, and the amount of people, good seasoned collectors, that, and I'm going to put regulatory to the side, just, let's just talk about it from a purely business standpoint. What I'm hearing from my customers is, as the inventory is starting to pick back up now post COVID, they're having hard time hiring good agents. And just like any sort of business, like Nathan's analogy about the warehouse, they may if let's say it's a 200 person agency, and they're looking across their floor and they know, 25 of those agents those are my primo agents. If I could just replicate them, I would be in really great shape. And by the way, they probably said that same question to themselves 20 years ago. If I could just have these 25 guys and I could replicate them out to my 200, I'd be cooking with gas. But that was never going to happen, just because of human nature and just the effects of the labor force. Now you can see that on the horizon. If I can build my large language model based on those 25 agents, or 10 agents, or 5 if you want, if you've had them long enough, you've got your system of record, you've got all your notes, and you've been recording the conversations as well. And if you could peel that out and stick that into your large language model, then all of a sudden you've really sort of changed the game as far as how you can deploy your business for your customers moving forward. Now, the question, I have customers right now today who would want that to happen. If they could roll that out, we haven't talked about cost yet, and I know we will, but if they could roll that out today and have same or better cost model, it's a no-brainer. So the foot on the gas has been pushed. Everyone, all the agencies should be thinking about this right now, because I think as I've been preparing for this, I really think we're on the cusp of a whole lot of sea change in here. What could slow it down? 1, cost, 2, regulatory, and it might be fine, because a lot of us and a lot of our customers need time to sort of adapt and slowly. We're in collections. We're on the lagging end sometimes on technology, so or adoption, I should say, not interest, but just sort of rolling it out. So I'm bullish on it, but everybody, including Latitude and Genesys, need to be thoughtful about where we're preparing our customers to go next.
Well, and you guys both bring up a good point about the regulatory environment. If you look back, text messaging has been a major communication channel for more than 20 years before our industry jumped on it because of regulatory uncertainty. And so I think there's going to be significant regulatory uncertainty as it relates to AI for whatever period of time. I think it's interesting that, those trade associations or organizations that are specifically dedicated to artificial intelligence are arguing heavily back and forth about what standards might look like in the future. And I feel like we're at one of those points where it's still a little early to start laying that regulatory framework beyond. You don't want to get too finite with that framework at this point in time, because you're going to stifle the innovation and the growth. It'll be interesting to see how that continues to kind of evolve, but I think a lot of it is going to evolve based on how we're able to feed the models, right? It's garbage in. We've all heard the term, right? Like garbage in, garbage out. If you are loading terrible data into an amazing system, it's not going to work.
I have a quote I stole from
Please.
somebody. Artificial intelligence is not artificial wisdom.
I like that. I like that. I mean, look, when it comes to the data that we're feeding into any particular system, it's like putting unleaded gasoline in a Ferrari. Like the car is not going to run at an optimal level by any stretch of the imagination. And so look, the first thing that we always look at is that structured versus the unstructured data. And everybody who's watching this webinar, I'm sure can relate with the idea of collector notes. How are you managing collector notes? Like what opportunities do you have to use the information that is being collected? Because let's be honest, there's nuggets of gold in there, but how are you going to sift down to them?
Yeah, I don't know how you do it without AI. We've been collecting these notes for decades. What have we been able to use with them? It's
I mean, but that becomes the issue, right? Is like having data is one thing, having usable data is something very different. So talking about structured versus unstructured data, I think is a core piece. Now, Nathan, you've been part of implementations of, of all different types of technologies across the space. What do you see in this area? Like, do you think this is going to be the giant stagnating factor for the application of AI in our space?
Well, I switch over to my earpods. Are they better?
A little bit.
Okay. So the interesting part that I think, and we've gone 21 minutes and haven't said generative AI or ChatGPT. So I'm going to break that mold and
jump into it.
Say it real quick. Is I think that's one of the really interesting things about this next level is generative AI has the ability to actually take unstructured or unlabeled data. And because of the way their foundation models are built, able to actually decipher and do something with it, right? And it's it's a very, very different world. So again, when that actually becomes a commercial real reality, I don't know. That'll be interesting to see, especially in our industry. But when it comes down to like the structured unstructured data, like what we always kind of have looked at in both companies, the last two companies that I've worked at, is how do I actually structure unstructured data, right? There's today isn't a way with the models that we have in kind of the traditional ML to be able to actually do anything with unstructured. But there is ways to be able to actually create some intelligence around it. And more tools like natural language processing can actually find information out of the unstructured and then structure it, right? So there'll be interesting phase where more and more companies are able to actually digest unstructured because of the powers of generative AI. But today, and I think for a while, we're very boxed in because especially if we want to actually be intelligent and safe around next best action. I mean, it makes me sweat, and I'm not even an agency owner, but think about trying to drive a next best action off of collector notes. Right? Like,
it brings up an interesting point here, right? Because as we look at how structuring the data that we already have that is currently unstructured is going to be a monumental task, right? Like there's just I've seen terabytes worth of collector notes housed in systems. Like it's insane. But I think what's going to happen is, if for me, like the first triage step towards being able to walk that AI path has been looking at tools that I may not be able to go backwards today, but I can start structuring this same piece of data going forward. And the collector notes is a perfect example. So, through doing our 5-minute pitch videos, I learned about Prodigal Pro Notes and the tool set that they have that's listening to the phone calls and then taking structured notes and then giving you the capability to run reporting and other things off of that. Now, that doesn't help me for the notes that I collected in 2017, but for the notes in 2023 and 2024, it could potentially be an effective tool. But the point that I'm making here is starting to look down the path towards, okay, what data do I have that's unstructured now? And are there opportunities to structure that data for the future? Right? Like, can I start that process now and start structuring my data so I can start learning? Just because something wasn't done yesterday doesn't mean I can't start doing it tomorrow. And I think that's one of those stagnating points as an industry to where, it's not clean from day one. So do we want to start, how do we go forward? And a lot of people want to clear the decks and start moving forward. Others want to say, okay, we'll maintain this and start going forward. And I think from a technical capacity, there's a lot of different ways in which this could be approached. So I think it'll be interesting to see how it starts to unfold.
I was thinking that, there's never a bad time to start doing things better, right? So I can't argue with the idea of structuring your notes files better today, starting today. That it's only going to make whatever you're trying to accomplish down the road easier. However, is AI in the broad sense good enough to fix whatever issues your unstructured data have? Is it worth the investment now when AI will just blow past that as an easily solvable issue down the road? Is it worth? I don't know what that answer is, but I don't know if you're prepping for an eventual move to sort of the nirvana of AI. Is that something you need to be prepping for now, or will it be so gosh darn good when it gets here and you're able to utilize it? Will it matter?
I guess it depends on how you're looking at it in terms of making technology a competitive advantage for your business. Right. So, I mean, will we eventually get to a point to where all data can be structured? Probably. I mean, computers are really smart. So I don't hate to put it like in such a simple way, but that's true. But I think the more that we can start to learn to structure our information in a way in which it's going to be usable into the future, and we're creating these massive data warehouses that enable us to learn from those patterns. It's been interesting as I've been going through and doing an evaluation of an organization that's heavy in the data space. We've looked at kind of these time, we'll call them like a liquidation curve, but we'll look at it over time, right? And when you look at one portfolio, it's all jagged. And if we pull out further, right, it smooths out. And if we pull out further, it smooths out. It's like how some people talk about the volatility of Bitcoin in the crypto marketplace. And others will point to the fact that no one's owned Bitcoin for 5 years and lost money, right? So there's this balance of how we're going to handle that timing and how quickly do we want to attack those problems. I think if we structure your data sooner rather than later, you can build a competitive advantage for yourself as an organization because you will be able to learn at a faster pace and you're not stuck waiting on the when. Right? Will artificial intelligence get there? Yeah, but when?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, just as a kind of an operational takeaway that I think anyone listening to this, whether live or recorded, is talking with the companies that you partner with today, because you might be surprised on how many of them have tools to actually help structuring your data. So it's not just limited to, one or two different kind of new vendors. Even if you're building your own thing and you're using an AWS service, right, or, one of their things, they have ability to actually do the exact same thing and summarize and structure, conversations and notes and things like that. So it is one of those things where it'll be, it's going to be one of those things where it's just going to be an inflection point, right? Like, people will get tired of working with 2% of their data, because that's probably what most of these companies have in terms of structured comparative to unstructured. And say now the tools, their partners, even homegrown technology that they're using and services from these big providers, it's going to be available. It's going to be commercially viable. It's going to be something where it's low code. There's going to be things where you're going to be able to do really incredible stuff. And then these giant black holes of data that exist out there for so many organizations will open up. And to your point, like all the things, like the customers I talk with in the receivables industry, they want two things. I want to collect more money and be sued less. That's like, and you boil it down, like that's it, right? Now, yeah, there's the auxiliary, like I want better agents, I want a better work environment for my people. There's a lot of other different things.
But those are all means to collect more money.
Yeah. And so when you boil down things like a building block, like structured or unstructured data, if you really want to try to use the tools that exist in artificial intelligence as a whole, that is building block number one that you have to be able to tackle. And you have to be able to understand the power of that. Because once you get there, then now whatever partners and tools that you're building or you're leveraging with become exponentially more powerful, because now your scope is so much wider. And that's the biggest challenge, I think, for a lot of organizations.
I think that's it makes a lot of sense. I guess the last kind of takeaway from feeding the model would be the intent of that model itself, right? I hear a lot about these, incredible models, but the question becomes like, what specifically are we trying to accomplish here? Or like, what is the current objective that you're trying to accomplish in looking at this model? Are you trying to find the right time, the right place, the right channel by which to contact the consumer? Are you trying to prioritize a large set of data? Like, what are you actually trying to accomplish? And I think in the end, everything boils down to the, how do I collect more money? How do I get sued less? But what specific items can be used as building blocks to achieve that objective? Right. And that is where you can start applying different technologies towards your end goal.
Yeah. I'll just jump in real quick on this in terms of kind of real life interactions that I have with like SuccessKPI, either customers or prospects, is in many cases, I just want to know what I don't know today. And it's not necessarily having a specific intent in their head, other than collect more, sued less. But in terms of so many engagements that we deal with, is they have probably very, very good gut feelings on a whole bunch of different things, but very little hard and foundational data to be able to support their argument, right? And that's the challenge.
Agreed.
If you're selling AI into this space, the first thing I would do, Nathan, is go to your prospect and say, give me a bunch of data, and I can kind of spit back out at you, here are our findings. And if they validate what that guy feels in his gut, then that person is probably ready to take the next steps towards, okay, how can I use it? Then it'll open up their minds to saying, okay, how can I use this to improve my business? But if you don't pass that first test, you're going to get kicked right out the door probably.
Yeah, because their intents today are built around, in most cases, less than 1% review of unstructured data in terms of conversations, right? Like QM processes are built around a handful of supervisors looking at 5 to 10 calls, maybe a month.
Yep.
And now throw in SMS or email and those level of communications, right? There's in most cases almost zero quality management, quality assurance around those pieces. When you get to that point where you understand you can't make business decisions on 1% or less than 1%.
Yep.
And they all know this. I mean, I'm not telling them something that they don't know. Right. But understanding the process of being able to get to 20% or 50%, and even today 100%. Yeah. Right. And actually have real data to actually be able to lean on. I think it's less, not to rewind, I think it's less important to understand the past, because especially it's a new world that we're in, but more importantly, how are my people reacting to current situations, and then drive forward of like, okay, how they're reacting is generating these types of results. I'm learning these things of do's or don'ts, and I'm understanding these are my areas of opportunity, and this is where I need to zone in and focus.
So would you start building your large language model just say today, start fresh, or how far back in the past?
That was my next question too, right? Like it's an interesting point. And can you really value data prior to 2022?
So our experience has been there's been a blend of both, but in most cases, what we're hearing is usually no more than 6 months to 12 months is a look back period that anyone's really too interested in. Like, I've never heard one person say, I really want to get deep into the pandemic period, right? No one has said that because
behaviors aren't going to match.
No,
right? So what you learn, is it true?
Yeah. And I think the other big thing, so I think a lot of technology partners out there have been smart about how they're building their platforms as being the ability to customize what you're actually chasing, right? And so I know my platform, so I'll speak just our building blocks. So we've moved away from kind of the way speech analytics has been done in terms of key phrase or word search or word identification, and actually then built models around what we call topics and themes. So it's taking kind of what speech and text analytics used to be and using it so that now you can actually, like you're talking about, build intent into what you're looking for. And then those models are then learned. And so and I think a lot of companies are doing something similar to this, right? They're trying to build customizable models that learn based off of, to your point, right? These larger models to be able to actually then give you the building blocks to chase an actual endpoint, right? And I think before it was very much just like, if this thing was said, then that must mean something. And today it's much more advanced in terms of what you're searching for.
What was the eureka moment when somebody said the way we've been applying it before is just not really getting to where we need to go, and then sort of step back and do what you just described?
Yeah, so we've had a number of interactions with customers where they've flat out kind of said, we built a lot of our QA around being able to generate good scores, because those are the things that we forward over to our clients, right? And that's not just clients, that's prospects, that's just industry. I think that's pretty normal. People are not wanting to build scoring models that make them look terrible. The auxiliary blowback of that, though, right, is you're not learning very much of areas of opportunity. So one of the aha moments that we had was actually going through this process and understanding, like, we had to do some very deep learning for the organization, because we said, the way that your agents are being scored and the way that you are viewing how well you're doing your quote unquote job is going to dramatically change, because we're not going to be feeding, and these models aren't going to be feeding what you want to see. They're going to be feeding the challenges and opportunities. And I think that's the aha moment that I had, was organizations are finally okay with that move. They're finally okay with doing that, because now they see the tools out there to actually make them better.
It's very interesting. That's a very interesting, thought process, and you're not wrong, right? Like, nobody wants to fail their own compliance evaluations or scoring methodology. And to take it one step further, I could tell you from my experience that contextual filtering has made a massive difference, right? Like, it's one thing to filter keywords, it's another thing to filter keywords in context. And so working with one of my partners, we've been kind of looking at how we're extracting information from data sets in new ways, based on not just saying, for example, the word federal, right? Because it could be federal government, or it could be federal bank, right? Like, it could fall into a lot of different things. And so like you can't oversimplify the way that you're filtering different data sets. And I think it's been interesting to see how that all that has kind of gone. I know we've only got about 20 minutes left in our discussion today, so we could talk about the data experiments if this is something that's interesting, to the audience. Just kind of quickly here, is each time that we're kind of building out a new opportunity for the application of whether it be machine learning or something else, it's about setting up your original observations and being honest with yourself about what you're seeing, and setting up an experiment so that it can either pass or fail. You don't just want to structure your kind of data experiments to be one success after the next. And honestly, if you're never having a failure, your criteria is too low. I don't know if you'd kind of agree with that one, Nathan, but if you win every battle that you're going out to, chances are you're not fighting very hard battles.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things with the scientific method, right, is I don't think there's an operator within our industry that hasn't gone through this exact same process, right? They've had a gut feeling. They've said, "Oh, let's I have an idea to how to fix this." They test it, not at full scale, but in a segment. They measure how did that test go? And then make a decision based off of that. So that I don't think this process is anything new. I think what's new today are the tools to be able to make each one of these steps exponentially more powerful, right? So your observation today for a lot of organizations is, for the most part, built on gut feelings, industry knowledge. I've been doing this for 20, 30 years, so I know that this is the way that things exist. So therefore, I have an understanding, and my hypothesis is built on that, right? Where when you use things like artificial intelligence built correctly, it's completely unbiased, right? It's going in there and saying, these are the things that are actually happening. I have no quote unquote 20 years of experience in the industry, but I'll tell you exactly what's happening. And people just have to have the gut to be able to digest that and then do something with it, because it's, to your point, it's very easy to be fed, pudding all day long and love it. But when you get something that doesn't taste as good, it's very easy, and especially if that's your job, right? If you're leaving your QA department to be able to do that assessment, it's a challenge, because their value is based around the best quality assurance scores, right? So now you kind of almost have built-in bias in there. So I think the technology now today, the partners that are out there, give people the tools to take each one of these steps and actually be exponentially better at them. That's going to make your final decision so much better.
I actually write one of these out every time I'm doing a data experiment. Like, I've got a little template that is following my, process, or it's my process following the, sixth grade science class that we all took. But basically I sit down and I write all of these out. I try and come down to a one sentence observation or objective. I go through my hypothesis. What do I think is going to happen? Even if I'm building a scoring model, and to your point, as you're building these models to try and identify the scores on these calls, like, are you seeing a standard distribution when you run it back against a mountain of data? So if I build the scoring model and I've got, let's call it 2 years of data to run it against, like, now I have to go plug those 2 years worth of data through that model and see what kind of a scoring distribution do I get, and do I see anything that resembles a bell curve? Because if you take any national pool of accounts and you look at FICOs or whatever your preferred scoring methodology is, you're generally going to find pretty close to that standard bell curve. The more data that you put into that, the closer to a bell curve it's going to be. And I think that's one of the ways that I try to always look at a data experiment, to ensure I'm not just building a process that makes me look good, right? That I'm not building out my testing or my scoring process just so that it gives me the result that makes me look good with my colleagues. I want the real result so that I can achieve performance, right? Because fooling yourself is not going to fool the bottom line results that you produce financially.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if you guys see this as often as I have, but more and more organizations are creating an island that is doing this within their organization, right? So they're not necessarily a part of quality assurance. They're, performance analytics, subject matter expert. There's something that has no touch or feel or influence to any other organization that they're grading and looking at. And also they don't get any credibility plus or minus based off of what their output is. Their sole task is output, right? And so when you have that level of kind of an island, so to speak, of that, it becomes really, really powerful. And that where I've seen organizations that properly institute that, like we had a customer that their comment was it was like the data lights got turned on, and it's smart. It makes a whole bunch of sense.
I definitely understand it, and I feel like there's a lot more to come here if we're smart with our data and we look at the way that we can use it. Now, this was, we kind of talked, we might have this one out of order here, but this is where we were kind of talking about extending the capacity of our people and kind of like what our process looked like. I think based on our timeline, a more interesting discussion is around centralized data repositories, which is, we talked about the unstructured notes and the transactional information, but like, how are we tracking and storing this information in a way in which it's going to be usable and manageable, right? Because there's this balance to be struck between I want to keep mountains of data because it could potentially be value to my artificial intelligence. But now I think we could start talking a little bit about the cost here, because of one of the costs that I see whenever I think about this mountain of data is the cost of my cyber insurance, which is generally tied directly to the volume of records that I have within my system. Tough balance, right? Because it's a difficult one, right? Like, how much data do I want to have so I can run it through these models versus how much am I willing to pay to house this data? And to me, it's, we've constantly seen this decline in the cost of hosting data, right? Like, just look at your phone and how you used to have, like 3 gigs was like a fantastic phone, and now less than 150, you feel like, you can't store anything.
And yet we're still butting up against the limit.
And we are always butting against the limit, but that becomes the point, right? Is that, I was trying to remember where I heard this, but something about the 80% of the world's data was created in the last 24 months.
Yeah.
And that statement has been true for many years now. So you've just got like this mountain of data, but the cost has become less expensive to host it, right? Like the cost of the hard drives or the computing power out in the cloud or storage in the cloud has been reduced over time. But now you have these other ancillary costs that are starting to affect storing all of that data too, like your cyber insurance policies. I think it'll be interesting to see how people balance that, right? Like, we've all got our data destruction policies, and there's the timelines in which we know we're going to destroy some data. But I think it's interesting the way that the world has started to shift more towards this data warehouse perspective, meaning like I want to collect a lot of information. I want to store that information because it's going to be useful. But I have seen a lot of data hoarding coming along with that too. And they have to keep something just to keep something, even though that unstructured piece of information is probably got little to no value by the time it would be able to be structured. So I'm curious, have you come across some of this stuff, Nathan, as you've been kind of deploying it, or Chris, as you've been kind of looking at how you're structuring information on behalf of clients for the future?
I mean, I'll just make a blanket statement. I would say 95% of our customers don't, gosh, it's going to sound a little mean, but aren't really thinking about that as much as they should be, is that they're storing everything and continue just to throw as much into the repository as possible, and are sort of kicking the can down the road on optimizing for that. Getting back to that cost thing, I feel like we've sort of hit the floor now, and then what's happening now are the costs are going up on on the PCI and the SOC 2 and the insurance. And so what I think we've gotten is nearly as, I don't see anything coming down the road that's going to all of a sudden say, storing data is even cheaper now. I mean, it might incrementally get lower, but I think that curve has sort of bottomed out. So we're having more conversations with our customers about, fixing that problem now than in the 5 years I've been involved. So those are the questions right now. So that's my perspective. I don't know where you're at, Nathan, from that.
Yeah, and I think I think one of the big and obvious changes, right, is the adoption of the cloud, and the ability and flexibility and scalability that organizations have been able to get through truly leveraging the power of the cloud. The challenge right today is, to your point, Chris, and his perfect point is, being, I don't know if you call it unselective or non-selective about what data you're actually storing, becomes your Achilles heel, so to speak, right? And so, we're seeing a lot of people that are converting and trying to convert away from the old school SQL database, which in 24 years in the industry, I think pretty much all of them, except for maybe the first 5 or 10, it was every organization I was a part of ran on SQL databases. And
standard SQL relational databases. Yeah, I would say that would have been the standard for the
and trying to, and you're not necessarily converting, but leverage those in a smarter way, as well as being more selective about the data, right? So the biggest unstructured piece of data, right, in a contact center is obviously notes, but probably more or bigger in terms of storage is conversations, right? Call recordings. And the ability for organizations to be able to distill those massive amounts of unstructured data down to structured insights, right, inside those conversations is a huge piece of, and why, obviously I'm biased, but why I think speech analytics tools are so important for organizations is because it's not just like, hey, I get to understand what's going on in these conversations, what's working, what's not, but it's also taking this massive amount of data that you're probably not doing a whole lot with today and distilling that down into structured data that you can actually now do something with a high level of confidence because it's at scale, right? So you're not depending on less than 1% of calls being manually scored. You're actually looking at your organization. So, I mean, what's also interesting, though, and this is actually a study that our organization was a part of through Forrester, but the percentage of these, I think it's like 75 or 80%, I'm probably misquoting percentages, but of organizations have made some level of move to the cloud in the contact center, but less than 25% of them are actually happy with that move today. Totally satisfied, right? So there's pieces of them that they're really happy about. They're probably happy about the flexibility and different things, but that move has also removed a lot of the tools that they had in the old premise world or the old hosted world, right? And so they're lacking things. And Chris, you see this, right? With Genesys, they're sunsetting, products that were wildly successful and popular. And that transition for even Genesys is a really interesting one because you see customers, making the move to the cloud and then realizing I don't really have all the same things yet that I used to have in my old world. So I'm moving forward in technology, but in some cases I'm always taking one step forward and 2 steps back. And that's not just limited to Genesys. That's limited to pretty much every cloud contact center system out there. There's a little bit of a challenge still moving to the cloud and platforms. And understanding that challenge is a really interesting and an important thing to know.
Yeah, my analogy on that is, for decades I've been managing my own PC. It was owned by the company, but I defragged my computer back in the day, and I knew how to, do all the things that I needed to keep it running in tip-top shape, and that's all been locked out now for security reasons. I can't barely make any changes at all to my own personal machine. And I feel like an idiot calling up the IT desk asking them to do stuff that I used to be able to do.
That you know how to do. Yeah.
It's a similar thing when you make the move to the cloud. In many ways, the array of things that you can do has just been broadened, but that array of things that you used to do is a smaller segment of that. And does that make up for you lost some control that you used to have, and that's a human nature. To losing control is not a happy thing. At least I feel that way.
Well, I mean, it's a common occurrence now, and I think part of that comes down to the simplification of the services that are being provided. And so when you're providing software as a service, you're handling a lot of these things on behalf of a customer who's used to having to handle it. But then it comes the busy problem, as we call it, right? Like now I have this time. Like what right? Like I used to spend this time updating my computer. Like what am I supposed to do now?
Maintaining a cloud infrastructure is no joke. It is. I think everybody bought into the promise. You have these expandable. You just click a few buttons and you've expanded your usage and stuff like that. But man, the bill just goes up like that, and you got to watch out. It's easy to spend a lot of money on AWS, Google, and Azure. Easy.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It's true, but and it's the balance where we always have to look at the cost of the people that I had in the office that were physically managing this equipment, the 5-year life cycle I had on these things, the failovers on top of failovers that I had to have in place. How about the constant evaluations using my time to identify any single points of failure? Like, I don't really worry about that kind of physical infrastructure anymore. Now I'm still looking at those same things in the digital infrastructure, but I think we're starting to get to a point where it's less required, but with that comes our ability to run the computing power necessary to run some of the AI and machine learning tools and algorithms that we're running today. Without the cloud, I don't know that this catalyst during COVID would have given us that capability of going to that next level.
Correct about that, definitely. I mean, we would.
You know what I mean? So like, it's
unless we move to the cloud anyway. But yeah, right.
Correct. Right. Well, but we needed more computing power, and there's only so much of that. And I wonder if someday we'll see something like those of us that have watched HBO's Silicon Valley, where they're using everybody's mobile phones to fragment and store data. I don't know if we'll ever go to that level of decentralization or not, but an interesting conversation for another time. Gentlemen, thank you so much. We just kind of hit our hour here. And I really want to thank you guys for coming on and having a chat with me. It's always fun. I know we didn't get through all the slides, but we kind of knew that was coming when AI was the topic.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Absolutely. For those of you that are watching, if you thought this was an interesting conversation, please share it on Friday when you see this come across on your LinkedIn feed or on our YouTube channel. But until next time, everybody, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate you, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks, guys.